God as mystery.
One of the most egregious errors that we make in our thinking about God is our desire to reduce him to something that will fit inside the human mind. We want to understand God and his ways absolutely and completely. In our search to make him understandable, we remake him into our own image. In the words of Martin Luther, our God is too small. This is especially true in our attempt to understand the nature of death, illness, and suffering. Faced with the theodicy dilemma between human will and God's sovereignty, we attempt to resolve the question once and for all, and we can never resolve that question. God is not so easily captured. His will remains an unsolvable mystery. The book of Job is a good illustration of that point.
In chapter 1 of Job, it begins with a meeting in heaven. First, we see Satan appearing before the throne of God. Now, why Satan is before the throne of God anyway perplexes us, since our usual understanding is that Satan has been exiled from the face of God. Yet here he is before God's face, presumably on the summons of God, and God asks him, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Satan has been permitted the freedom to roam the earth, but it is God who permitted that freedom. So Satan is not really free. He's more like an imprisoned felon on furlough, allowed to roam the earth for the purposes for which God has. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and all of his household and everything he has? Have you not blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land? But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to his face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but the man himself, do not lay a finger."
In other words, Satan proposes a contest to God. "Let's see how strong your people are," Satan says. "Give him permission to strike Job, and Job will curse God to his face." This is all God's doing, of course. Satan would not have noticed Job if God had not mentioned him as a test subject. Satan would not have the freedom to hurt Job if God did not permit it. So as much as we want to blame Satan for what happens here, we cannot deny that it is God who allowed it and that is behind it.
So Satan goes to work on Job. First he takes his cattle and his wealth. Then he takes his children and his health, inflicting him with boils and sores. Finally, in a cruel touch, he leaves his wife, who has become so embittered that she tells him, "Curse God and die." All of this is just in the first 2 chapters of Job. Then Job's comforters arrive. Bildad, Zophar, Eliphaz, and finally young Elihu. At first, these comforters do well. They keep their mouths shut. But as often happens when we try to comfort those in grief, they could not refrain from offering their own uninformed opinions. One by one, they speak, usually pronouncing variations on the theme that it was really Job's fault that this happened and not God's. Job must have done something wrong. He was being punished. Job must have presumed too much on his relationship to God. Job protests that he is innocent, but they condemn him as a liar. So rather than becoming his comforters, these comforters become his tormentors. Finally, in chapter 39, God himself speaks. "Who is it that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will answer you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footing sets? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limit for it and set doors and bars in place? When I said, 'This far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt.' God continues to speak. In the longest speech by God in the Bible, he tells of mysteries and powers that he alone possesses. And at the end, in Job 42 through 5, he adds, "Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him." Then Job answered the Lord, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth." God does not answer Job. He corrects him and his friends. Humans cannot understand the ways of God. If Job and his friends knew the little about God that we did, that he and Satan had a kind of bet in heaven involving Job, what comfort would that have brought? This is not an even contest between God and Satan, but one that was intentionally provoked by God himself. The real reason for Job's suffering is not revealed to us. All we know is this, that God is in control. Satan causes mischief, but it is at God's command that he can work, and only at God's command. We understand nothing about the workings of God, though we have the freedom to respond to him. We understand nothing of how he works. God calls upon us to accept his ways as a mystery. When we are called upon to respond to others in pain, we frequently act like Job's comforters. We take it upon ourselves to render God non-mysterious. This is a grievous mistake. It is not up to us to understand why death or suffering occurs, but to accept that God is still in control. To give reasons why another suffers is not our business. Neither is it within our power to do so. Any attempt to impose our judgment on suffering is liable to heap condemnation on victims, or to condemn God. Neither of these is desirable.
God's will is knowable, but only as a mystery. We do not understand or comprehend it, neither can we explain it. We must instead accept our ultimate ignorance in the face of his will. And when we comfort others, we must not assume to know the reasons, but instead to behave humbly as fellow humans before an all-powerful God. If we cannot help but judge others, or give answers of which we do not know, we will only hurt the situation. A helping person will not be concerned about the causes of suffering, but instead will focus upon its relief.